Much of the evangelical world is still in shock after news that Steve Lawson had been removed from his position as lead preacher at a church in Texas due to an inappropriate relationship with a woman. Stay tuned, and we'll talk about it. Well, good evening and welcome back to another week of Explain, another week where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. My name is Troy. I am your host. I am so thankful that you decided to take some time out of your Thursday night and join us here on Explain. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This episode is probably the most painful episode I have ever had to do. I never in a million years envisioned that I would have to do an episode like this. And let me just say at the outset that I don't do this lightly. I'm not under any delusions as to the as to the seriousness of the subject I am about to talk about. So let's get into it. As I mentioned a moment ago, and if you're clicking on this video, then you probably already have an idea of what's going on. But Steve Lawson, a few weeks ago, was removed from his position as lead preacher at, I believe it's Trinity Bible Church in Dallas, Texas. He was removed from that spot after telling the elders of his church that he had had an inappropriate relationship with a woman. There's a lot of subsequent news that came out. Honestly, the elders are still in the process of doing what they have to do on a local level. There are various ministries that have made statements about Lawson and about what they're going to do moving forward. I guess one thing that should be said is even this ministry has recommended his resources in the past. So you have these various statements that these people are making. Different ministries that he was involved with made statements. And honestly, this is definitely a tough thing. It is. I mean, what can you say in a situation like this? What can you say? This is a guy that by all appearances was a giant to a lot of people. A lot of people took a lot out of Steve Lawson's ministry. Myself included. But one thing that I've tried to process through, right? Because honestly, just like all the rest of you, I'm processing through this, just like anybody else that heard about this. I'm processing through it, and man, at the beginning, for the first couple of weeks, I was hurt. I really was. I was hurt. And so, yeah, that was my initial reaction. And to anyone out there who feels that way or felt that way, I understand. I totally understand. But I've tried to think about, how do we process through this? And honestly, like what lessons have I learned from this, and maybe what are some good examples of ways to deal with this information, to deal with it when news comes out. And the thing I keep coming back to is this idea of watchfulness. Now, I don't know how many people are even familiar with that term. To me, even when I started thinking about that term, that sounds like an old, Puritan term, right? Watchfulness. I think we've oftentimes, just not thought about that. So I started thinking about that. And the reason why I started thinking about it was not necessarily because I was like, oh, Steve Lawson didn't practice watchfulness. I don't know what he did. I don't know whether or not he did practice that. And that's not really my purpose in coming on here today to talk about watchfulness, is to say, oh, Stephen Lawson didn't do this. No, it's more what did this remind me to do? What did this situation remind me to do? And I think one of the things that it really did remind me of the importance of, just in my own life, is watchfulness. And so, first of all, I think it would be good to define what we mean by watchfulness. Okay, so watchfulness could be defined even as it appears in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So in that context, when you think about being watchful, it could almost be defined as staying alert, being vigilant, right? It's this idea of almost, you think about the armor of God, right? Ephesians 6, never taking off your armor, never putting down your sword. And honestly, like I said, I don't know Steve Lawson personally. I'm not in a position to comment on his personal life, and I'm not going to. Frankly, I'm not. That's not my place. It's not my position. However, one thing that, again, it reminded me to do, something that it's just another reminder for me to apply this in my life, is to never put down my sword. To never come under the illusion that I can take my armor off and that I can let my guard down and that I can, behave in such a way as if I'm not at war with sin and with the devil, and like Ephesians chapter 6 says, you are in a spiritual war. And so that's what it reminded me to do. Because oftentimes, let's be honest with ourselves, even if we step outside the Stephen Lawson thing, like I said, I'm not saying he dropped his sword. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying any of that. It's not my place to say, right? I can have an opinion on it, but I don't want to share it because it's not my place to say. But even if we think about our lives, it can be so easy to start coasting through life. It can be so easy to come under this illusion that we're just walking through life, and when the hard times come, we'll go to the Lord in prayer and ask Him for help, right? But I don't. I've seen that in my own life, and this was just a reminder that no, the enemy comes and he attacks you. The enemy comes and he attacks you, and that's. This was a reminder of that every day, any day, Christians can be faced with temptation. And in order to be ready for those times, in order to be best prepared for those times, it would be wise to keep our armor on, to keep our sword in our hand, and to stay watchful, to stay vigilant. Right, like 1 Peter 5 talks about being watchful, watching over your own soul, right? And that's important, and that's really something that's just been impressed on my heart ever since this happened. It reminded me that, look, hey, this guy is, he's a public figure. He is a guy who's publicly in ministry. And so that happening, right? Him doing that should be a reminder to all of us as Christians, right? To make sure that that we watch over our lives and that we remember that, like 1 Peter 5 says, the devil prowls around, right? So if temptation came to him, then temptation can come to you, and temptation can come to me, and it's really important to just to be ready, to be vigilant, so that when the time comes, we can be prepared to stand. When we see something like this happen, how can we not be reminded that, oh, we're at war, right? We're at war with sin, with Satan, and with temptation. How can we not be reminded of that? And so that's what I would say. It's like we're at war, and that's what it reminded me of. And so the application there, like I said, would be watchful, be vigilant, right? Remember that you are at war. And a couple of guys that really have have talked about this recently, that I think just what they had to say was valuable. First of all, Darrell Harrison. Darrell Harrison says, "Pastor, your first ministry must be to your own heart." And then he quotes Proverbs 4:23, or he cites Proverbs 4:23. As the 17th century Puritan John Flavel said in his book, Keeping the Heart, "Above all other studies in the world, study your own hearts. Waste not a minute more of your precious time about frivolous and sapless controversies. Leave trifling studies to such as have time lying on their hands and know not how to employ it. Remember, you are at the door of eternity and have other work to do. Those hours you spend upon heart work in your closets are the golden spots of all your time and will have the sweetest influence upon your last hour. Heart work is weighty and difficult work. An error there may cost you your souls. A man can err in nothing more easily or more dangerously. Oh, then, study your hearts." And again, this is just a call that Darrell is putting out through through the words here of John Flavel, to remember to watch over our own hearts, and to remember that our hearts can be tempted, to remember that we are at war. Okay, and so the fact that we are at war with Satan, with temptation, with sin. The fact that is the case should cause us, like Darrell is quoting John Flavel is saying, to run into our prayer closets, to spend time with the Lord, to search our own hearts. This is so important. It's so critical. And there was another post by Josh Buice. He just simply said this: "We are all men of flesh and prone to wander. Lord, hide us under the shadow of your wings." And then he cites Psalm 17:8 through 10. And so really, one thing that I think it was really important to me as I started to process through this whole thing was just this idea of, man, this is so hard. It's hard to handle. It's hard to hear. And the reminder that we are at war with sin and with the flesh and with the devil, right? That's also, that's hard to hear, but it's true, right? And so the reaction, right? A good reaction for us would be to just go running to the Lord for help, right? Because we know that we are fallible. We're fallible, fallen people. And so it is important for us then in the wake of something like this to run to the Lord for help, and we can run to him for comfort too, because this, like I said, this is a hard thing. This is a hard thing. And so that's kind of been my reaction, is this thing with Steve Lawson that happened has chased me into my prayer closet. It has forced me into my prayer closet. It has caused me to realize how much I need the Lord's help every day. And so I've realized, I need to be in God's presence. I need to be in God's presence, because if this temptation can seek out a guy like that, then it can seek out you. And it can seek out me. And so I need to be in God's presence. I need to be there with him. I need his help. And so, and something like this just all the more reminds us how much we need the Lord's help. And you think about it. I mean, you look at guys who the Lord chose. If you think of the book of Acts, right? You think of the Lord. The Lord chose the Apostle Paul, who was a murderer before he was saved. He was one who persecuted Christians. Okay? That's who Paul was before he was saved. And the Lord takes him and he says, your sins are forgiven. He forgives his sins. And then he teaches Paul to rely on him for help. And really, I think that example of Paul relying on the Lord for help, you see it so clearly in a book like 2 Corinthians, right? Where, he's just constantly asking the Lord for help, and really he's being taught to rely on the Lord for strength and for help. And so I think that example is such an important one for us, because the Lord has forgiven us. He has shown us grace. He has forgiven us all of our sins. He has changed our life. Okay? Like with Paul. The Lord forgave Paul of his sins, and he changed his life. And his grace was sufficient for Paul. And so that's why, like I said, once again, I've just been reminded and reminded and reminded over and over again, and especially in this situation, of how weak all of us are, okay? And how much we need the Lord, and how much we need to run into his presence for help, for him to guard us against temptation, for him to guard us and give us strength and power, and for him to remind us to keep our armor on. That's, I think, the appropriate reaction to something like this, is just that we ought to be reminded to be watchful, to be vigilant, okay? Because this is a clear example that Christians are at war with sin, with the devil, with the flesh. So let us be reminded of that. There also were, I think, some, shall we say, bad reactions to this whole thing. Like, you may remember a few months ago when we talked about Trump and the guy that that fired some shots at him, and the guy behind him, Corey Comperatory, who was killed. There were people, specifically in the provisionist camp, or in the anti-Calvinist camp, you could say, who they were using that tragedy, the tragedy of Corey dying, as a reason to just rag on Calvinism, basically, as a way to make a theological point. Like, oh, if God moved the bullet away from Trump, then why didn't he move it away from Corey? All these things, right? And what I had said at the time was that was a disgusting response. That is something that should not happen. Shouldn't happen. Okay? And the reason it shouldn't happen is because you should not use someone else's tragedy to make a theological point. Likewise, I have seen people who have said things like, God sovereignly predestined Steve Lawson to have an inappropriate relationship with this woman. Basically, that God made him do this. Okay? And once again, I will say, that is a disgusting, despicable response to this. Okay? You have no right to use something that is very painful for many, many people, for his church, for his family, for all the people that were his friends. You have no right to take that and make a theological point out of it. Shame on you. Shame on you. Okay, you don't take something that is difficult for people already because something in real life happened to them. Okay, something in real life happened to his family, to his church. They're actually suffering the effects of this. You don't use them and make them a theological point. You don't do that. You don't do that. Now, I'm not denying that you can have debates about Calvinism and about Arminianism and about provisionism, and good. I mean, of course, we did 5 full episodes on Calvinism, right? And I'm sure we've done programs like this one about Calvinism as well. So there is a place to have those debates, but it's not using other people's pain to make your point. That's wrong. It's despicable. Okay? I also want to address another response that I've seen that I think is important to address. There are some people that are saying that, why is Stephen Lawson receiving grace from these people, right? Why are people showing him grace? And I'll just stop right there. But there's more to the argument, but I'll just stop right there. It is funny, like, why are Christians showing grace? I don't know. Because we're Christians, okay? That's why we show grace, okay? That's honestly kind of the more, when you hear that spoken out loud, it sounds even more ridiculous than it does when you read it in a tweet or something. But the idea, the gist of the argument was, why is Stephen Lawson receiving grace from Christians when Alistair Begg, who made those comments you may remember about attending an LGBTQ wedding, when he received a lot of vitriol from Christians? And well, I'll say a couple of things about that. First of all, as far as the people I know, okay, the people that I am aware of in Reformed circles, there was not really a marked difference between their response to Begg and their response to Lawson. I think both of them, what I'm trying to say is I think that in those cases, those guys were painting with the right brush. They were painting with the same brush. Okay, they weren't being unfair to Begg or partial to Lawson. I really don't think that they were. I don't see it. Now, there may be some crazy, wild, unhinged accounts online that were really difficult on Alistair Begg. Actually, I experienced some of those people. There have been some people that have commented on videos that I've made where I've talked about Alistair Begg and stuff, and they've been very, very tough on him. So I get that in that sense, that maybe you're calling for those people, but I mean no one listens to those people. No one follows those people. Okay. And the other thing is specifically if you think about this channel. You may remember the episode that we did on Alistair Begg after the LGBTQ stuff came out. And I really think that we were fair to him. I think that we said clearly that he was wrong. But I spent the better part of that episode telling people who were being disrespectful to him as an older man in the faith to stop. I mean, that was the majority of the episode. Okay, was telling people to calm down, and so I think that we have been consistent in our responses to both of those men. I would say just as I did with Alistair Begg, we ought to show grace even when it's hard, right? We have been forgiven, right? So then we also forgive. That's true. That's true enough. And I think that does apply in this situation, and the elders are handling their part of it. I have no reason to comment on what's going on there. That has to run its course. So we'll have to see with that. That's all I can say about that. I don't know him personally. I don't know the elders personally. I don't know any of that stuff. So I'm not at liberty to comment on that. But I think the right response is to run to the Lord, for help and for comfort in a situation like this. to be reminded that we are at war with sin and with the flesh and with the devil, and to not try to make theological points out of this. There's no need to. It's not called for. It's not right. And to remember to conduct ourselves with a spirit of grace and mercy. All right. And so I think that's all I have to say about that. I knew at some point we would have to talk about this. Honestly, I hated the idea of even talking about it. I've been putting it off for a long time. I specifically tried in this episode to not comment on news that I don't know is confirmed yet, or to or to make judgments on Lawson's character, on the character of his elders, or anything like that. I specifically tried not to do that. I wanted to tell you what this reminded me of. Okay, so I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time.